Hey people, how's it going? Happy Sunday. Cheers. I'm so glad to be doing this. It is swampy isn't the right word. Swampy isn't the right word. It's not a swampy Sunday night here in Statesboro, Georgia, but it is seasonal. I'll give it that. So here we are, hanging out. I have a big list of questions tonight. So you know what? Screw it. I've got a big glass of bourbon tonight, and I'm going to go through this whole list, hang out. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. I'll try and weave them in as I go. Before we start on the questions that have been asked by readers, I'll start off by saying this. I wanted to talk about Betsy DeVos and the Trump administration. I think watching her today embarrass herself on national TV was, it would be satisfying if it wasn't so infuriating, to have a Secretary of Education who hates education so much and is beyond incompetent. A lot of people have asked me what the main feature of the Trump administration is. And the truth is that it's just a lot of people who hate government who are there to destroy government. I thought it was, again, it would be funny if it wasn't so sad, but, it was like you have Rick Perry, who forgot about the Department of Energy during a debate, famously, basically ruined his, political career. You have him forget about it in a debate, and then you put him in charge of it. I mean, it is, it's a sick sense of humor, but the entire Trump administration exists to destroy the government as we know it, to ruin any ability of government to help people or to actually function in a any actual way. So you have Betsy DeVos, who is one of the leading advocates for destroying public education in America as Secretary of Education. It's going to be a lot when you look through the history books and you realize you have a person who is so adamantly opposed to one of the best things about America, which was the idea that everybody should get a decent education. In case you didn't know, maybe you just are disgusted by her, which, hey, I'm with you. This is a person who has spent her entire life, and of course, if you don't know, she is an heiress to an incredible fortune, unbelievable amounts of money, and she's used all of that money and all of that power and all of that sway to go after public education and destroy it in an effort to try and privatize education. And I wanted to talk about that for a minute. I think for a while, some people kind of wondered like why the right wants to destroy public education, what it is. And on its surface, I think your suspicions are probably true that the right is really interested in creating an educational system that makes sure that people do not understand what is happening to them and what's going on in their lives. They want people who are perfect workers, right? Who aren't going to question what happens in their lives and aren't able to piece together the propaganda and misinformation of the right, which is unfortunately what the right has wanted to do for years. But I wanted to talk a little bit about why the push for private education has happened. And a big reason for this is because of desegregation during the civil rights period. This idea of Christian schools, these private academies, they gained a lot of purchase as civil rights took hold and as desegregation took place. And basically, they would hide behind the religion and create like white-only academies where they didn't have to go to school with African Americans. This is the really shameful history of this debate. It's this idea that they may not be able to enjoy segregated public schools, but if they put the money in it and the effort into it, they can have their own institutions of segregation. It's really disgusting. And one of the hidden secrets of the right, and I've talked about this a little bit before on these streams and on Twitter, is that when we think about the modern right, a lot of the times we get caught up in the idea of it was motivated and sort of brought to power by opposition to abortion. But the truth is that this is a group that really doesn't have any principles outside of the consolidation of power. The evangelical right in particular was motivated by desegregation. I've talked about it a lot when I talk about the call to the shining city, which we'll talk about in a little bit. You actually see this split in religion where you have a bunch of Southern pastors, people like Jerry Falwell and people like him, who basically believe in a Confederate God who's a white supremacist. And they keep saying, we should not desegregate because this is a line that God has drawn. And then immediately they start creating these private private schools and places where, segregation can still exist outside of federal purview. So that's a big chunk of it as well, is the idea that these segregated communities and segregated schools, they're now they don't just have private schools. They're trying to turn that into the federal model. It's a backdoor invasion of education. And that's what's happening in public education in terms of elementary schools and high schools and all that. But we also need to talk about the right's attack on higher education. As many of you are aware, I am a college professor. And as a result, because I'm a college professor, I am the target of a ton of cultural derision. I'm sure you've seen movies and commercials. And of course, you see Republicans who give these speeches where they're like, we have a message for, these highfalutin professors who are, in their faculty lounges. Meanwhile, by the way, my faculty lounge has a coffee maker and, occasionally like a couple of, leftover forks. We got a refrigerator. That was really exciting. We got a refrigerator. So maybe you can put like your microwave meals in there. The truth is that higher education has been targeted and derided and intentionally vilified. I have to tell you, and one of the reasons we're doing these chats is I have a new book called American Rule, which is coming out. And one of the things that I found, I didn't really understand why higher education was vilified the way that it was. But when you actually go back into the history of America, and like let's go back into like the 40s and 50s, college was really different. It was really incredibly conservative. In fact, these colleges sort of served as surrogate parents of kids. They would come to college and they would watch over how they dated each other, how they conducted themselves, made sure that they didn't have adult lives. And in these structures, higher education actually served as kind of a research and development center for the military and also the intelligence communities. Social sciences, in a lot of cases, actually experimented on students and, sent that up the chain. They created a bunch of weapons. They really did some messed up stuff. There's really no other way to put it. Like college before the 1960s was a kind of messed up place. And let me tell you, the right loved it. I mean, that's what they wanted. They wanted to take, the best and the brightest, and they wanted to put them in service of, the military industrial complex. There's no other way to put it. But then in the 1960s, when all of a sudden you start having like free speech movements, you start having anti-war movements, you have the civil rights movement, suddenly the right was just like, screw these people, screw higher education. This is where they send kids to get indoctrinated. And actually, I have a question about that. I'll go ahead and weave that into it in a second. And they're like, oh, these kids are going to go to college and they're going to get indoctrinated and suddenly they're going to become Marxists and revolutionaries. Well, the truth is that colleges weren't indoctrinating students. They were giving students freedom. And the students indoctrinated themselves, right? They actually like started becoming radicals because they started having a modicum of freedom because higher education stopped, babying them and stopped watching over them and sort of like, ruling their lives again, like parents in absentia. And if you think for a second that college professors are just indoctrinating students left and right, I'm here to tell you as a college professor, it's hard enough getting them to do their homework, and like, this is part of the whole thing. Like my students, and listen, on Twitter and on here, you know exactly where I stand politically. In my classrooms, I don't talk about politics. I talk about writing. I teach them how to write. I don't care what they use their writing for. I want them to interact with the world. I want them to express themselves, however it is. I don't care if they're left, centrist, or right. It does not matter to me. All that matters to me is that they learn how to express themselves better, and that they find their voice, and they're good to each other, and they're good to the world. I don't care who they vote for in November. That's lame. Why would I care? I don't want to indoctrinate anybody. And here's the thing: most of the professors I know, they don't care either. Like they form intimate connections with their students, and they care whether or not their students are successful and whether or not they grow as people. How they grow and what they do, that's their business. So no, we're not actually we're not an indoctrinating institution. But what the right hates the fact that the university is a place where people can go and sort of dive deeper into subjects. And again, this is why I wrote the book American Rule. All this stuff is out there, and it's written by experts. It's written by academics. It's written by historians and political scientists and psychologists and sociologists. But the right has so attacked higher education that it's siloed higher education, which means that academics like me, most of the time, aren't able to talk to the public. We write to each other. We have a conversation with each other. We go to conferences. We respond to each other's papers. It just so happens that I go out and I talk to the public, and that's why we're doing this on a Sunday. But it has been incredibly detrimental. And one of the things I keep writing about, and I have an article on the Muckrake about this. Maybe I'll post it tonight. The Republican Party has partnered with corporations to not just silo experts, but to actually vilify experts. This is one of the reasons why Dr. Fauci, who we'll talk about in a little bit, why he's endangered, why his life is threatened, why we live in a time of a generational pandemic, and meanwhile, these experts and scientists are being harassed, and not just harassed, but disbelieved. And this whole big giant problem stems from the fact that, again, the right and corporations for years and years and years have been discrediting academics and experts because they don't want them to give out information that would hurt their political alternate reality. I mean, I was talking with somebody earlier today about climate change and how climate change and the pandemic are so similar because everyone knows it's real. Like even the Republicans who were going on Fox News talking about how it was a hoax and it was no better than the flu or no worse than the flu, they knew that they were lying. They were just playing a bet, and they were just betting that this thing would just sort of sweep through the country and then it would be gone. And they were making a bet, and then it turned out that they were wrong, and they cost hundreds of thousands of lives. But no, they know that climate change is real. Oil and energy companies have known since the 1980s, which was actually before it became very public. Like in the 1970s, we had some panics that led to some of the bigger reports. But in the 1980s, the energy companies had a ton of energy scientists, and they knew that climate change was real. Every time that they talk shit about climate change, they know they're lying. They're just hoping to continue profiting. And if you think about it, I don't know if you've ever done this. This is an old bar game, right? And it's where like two people take a quarter and they're on a table and they see who can like slide the quarter the closest to the end of a table without falling off. That's what this is about. It's about profiting as much as possible before the check comes due. And that's one of the things that's happening with the pandemic. And unfortunately, it's one of the things that happens with global climate change. So yeah, they have warred against experts and science and education. And they've done it time and time again. And in this case, particularly with DeVos and Trump just yelling, sending kids back to school, it's going to be a tragedy. And we need to be ready for that. We should be screaming from the rooftops, but it's going to be a tragedy. I don't know how long it's going to last. I don't know whether or not we're going to see states shut down. There's a part of me that's really afraid that it's just, that White House slogan, which is America's just going to live with it. I'm really terrified of that. I really am. And the first question is from somebody. They said they've read my article in the Muckrake about the pandemic in rural towns. I come from a rural town. I love small towns. I love rural areas. I watched, and listen, this is like really personal for me, and it really sucks. Um, I watched my hometown get just hollowed out. I watched, I was a child of the 80s, so I watched Walmart coming in town and everybody celebrated like mad. We got a Walmart and we became actually like a local rural center because no, Julia, we're going to talk about Trump wearing a mask. What a bullshit thing. You would think that he would have cured the pandemic because he put a piece of cloth over his stupid face. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. But so we got this Walmart in my hometown, and everybody thought it was going to be great. And of course, it hollowed out the town. And then, there were no jobs in the town to be had. All of the local businesses shut down. Meanwhile, deindustrialization just sort of flattened everything out. My family is a factory family. It's a mining family. Those industries went away, and I'll just be frank because it's heartbreaking, and it's one of the things I'm most passionate about. My family has suffered. They really have. The jobs they have had have used them up physically and have convinced them that they're disposable. They're not going to go to the doctor unless they have like a broken bone or something, and even then, they barely want to go. They've been really used up and spit out, and it is. Capitalism happened in my hometown. Hyper-capitalism in a global stage happened in my hometown. These people have been dying earlier deaths than they need to. They have been treated like they are disposable human beings. And now the pandemic is there. And the pandemic is ravaging these towns. And on top of that, it's not like anybody really pays attention to them in the first place, right? They don't really have the hospitals that they need, the doctors that they need. They don't have the information that they need. They've been appealed to by a complete bullshit artist like Donald Trump. And that's one of the reasons why he got elected is he appealed to a lot of people who were angry and wanted somebody to express their anger. And yeah, it was racist, patriarchal anger, but he got up there and really focused on it. So yeah, it ate up my hometown. It's eaten up a lot of hometowns. And this thing is going to be, it's going to be brutal. I'm just letting you know, people are suffering right now in these small rural areas, and the numbers are going, oh, Lucky Otter, we'll get better. Don't worry. I know this is depressing. It's something we got to talk about. It's hurt these small towns. It's going to get worse. All right, next question. Tucker Carlson's writer was racist. How shocked are you? This is my shocked face right here. That Tucker Carlson's main writer was a white supremacist, disgusting jerk. I have to tell you, I don't know how long you have, I don't know how long you've paid attention to Tucker Carlson. He used to be the dweeby guy with the bow tie who'd go on CNN's Crossfire, and he was just kind of a pedantic jerk. And, I have to tell you, I gained a lot of joy from watching Jon Stewart just absolutely hand Tucker Carlson his ass and ruin his career at that moment. And Tucker Carlson, for those who don't know, is an heir to like a frozen food. They're all heirs to these giant fortunes. And because they are, do I think he's a proto-fascist or an actual fascist? I think he's an opportunistic fascist. I think that he lives in his own type of thing. This thing that we're seeing from Tucker right now, this is a guy who's been fired from every job. He has been on literally every network, and he's been fired by every network because he sucks. Every time that somebody else is talking, he looks like a dog that is looking at a TV and has never seen a television before. It's incredible. The guy has nothing to offer at any place. But what he has figured out is that there was room for a person on Fox News to go straight white supremacist. So yeah, I assume that he was in these rooms just yucking it up with, this white supremacist troll who, if you haven't read the comments he made, he's disgusting. And everybody knew that he was disgusting. And here's the thing. You cannot be in a writer's room at a cable news show around somebody like this piece of trash and not know he's disgusting. Like, that's the kind of thing, like, in your mind's eye, you can just see Tucker putting his loafers up on a table and just laughing at whatever this racist white supremacist said. And it makes me angry how predictable it is, because that's everything he's been saying for the past like year has been straight white supremacist drivel. I mean, he has come so close to saying the 14 words verbatim, I want to say like a handful of times in the past month. It's what he's doing. He understands. And now that he's getting this this bizarre grassroots, like people begging him to run for president, whatever, you know, he's such a loser. He's such a loser. And as someone, again, who comes from like this working class family, I love when Tucker tries to tell me about what it's like for poor people in this country. You know, the Swanson food air. I love it. He just sucks. He just sucks so bad. And the fact that he hired this piece of trash is just, you know, it is what it is. And the problem is that I'm sure like a minor league baseball team just full of white supremacists, there's somebody who is just waiting for this guy to get found out, and probably like a troll on the Daily Stormer who's just ready to just come up and do more of this trash. It's really something. And anybody who works at Fox News, and I've talked to people who work at Fox News who have told me like they have trouble going to bed at night. After all this, if you don't resign from Fox News, I don't know how you sleep at night. I really don't. Like, it's not even hidden the way Roger Ailes used to hide it. Roger Ailes was that old, you know, Southern strategy Nixonian bullshit. At least they hid it behind rhetorical tricks, right? I mean, he was a total predator and like a dangerous human being, but at least they hid it. Like now, oh my God, if you turn on, I mean, Tucker Carlson's show is a 1 hour white supremacist variety hour. I mean, and Laura Ingraham, oh my God. And no, for the record, I do not think it was an accident that she got, you know, she got photographed at the RNC 4 years ago, you know, giving like the Heil Hitler sign. I'm not surprised by that at all. By the way, that reminds me, I'm supposed to be going to a convention. And I have to tell you, kind of happy that the conventions aren't happening outside the Republican one. You couldn't pay me enough money to go to these things. What a disgusting show that was. 4 years ago, oh my God. 4 years ago, the RNC in Cleveland was one of the most disgusting few days of my life. I think Hannity doesn't have the intelligence to feed himself, is what I think about Sean Hannity. He's just this old radio DJ jock who, you know, he's a head of hair. He's so pathetic. I wish somebody would tell Sean Hannity how pathetic he is. So I went to the RNC 4 years ago, and it was just alt-right jerks everywhere. And every time you turned around a corner, it would either be like Cernovich or it would be, what was it, Roosh, or, you know, some of these pickup guys or one of these disgusting people. And, you know, you'd come around, or actually, at one point, you know, I came around a corner and it was Alex Jones hanging out with Roger Stone and a bunch of people like posing for pictures with Stone. And then I went to Milo Yiannopoulos' like Trump event, and you know, what's his name? The neo-Nazi who got punched in the face, Richard Spencer. Richard Spencer was there, and all the other alt-right people were there. And you know, I was just like looking around at these people, and it was so disgusting. It was so slimy and repulsive. And it was that moment where I was just like, Trumpism isn't just happening, but it is, you know, it's this infection that, you know, was going to ruin the country. So I'm happy not to be going to the convention. I'll just tell you that. Oh yeah, actually real fast. I got into like a confrontation with one of those dudes. They were trying to do these gotcha videos for, you know, whatever websites they did, 8chan or wherever the hell these guys hang out. And they were like harassing this reporter, and I came over and I was just like, dudes, quit. And they like got in my face and they're like, what are you, a white knight? And then like I ran into them again, and they were talking so much shit as we were going to this Milo Yiannopoulos shit show. Oh my God, it was awful. Just awful. Okay. Tony says, I heard you say something somewhere about conspiracy theories emerging from powerlessness or ignorance. What does that mean? So very simply, when you have a system of power where people are not involved in making decisions in how that power is used, when they're not in the government, when they're not part of the process, almost instantaneously, they will create conspiracy theories to guess what those people in power are doing. And a lot of times they're right. Of course, a lot of the times their prejudice leads to, anti-Semitic drivel and stuff like that. Conspiracy theories are a simplifying of ideas of power and how it works. So, for instance, you all might be familiar with the idea of the New World Order, right? The New World Order, the idea that there are all these cabals that manage the affairs of the world or whatever, and they're trying for a one world government or whatever. That's just talking about globalization. It's talking about why Americans aren't doing well in globalization. Obviously, there's someone evil trying to manipulate them. The problem is that fascists and authoritarians and white supremacists always use conspiracy theories, which is one of the reasons why we talk about the deep state. It's one of the reasons why, we talk about Antifa being a terrorist organization. So what ends up happening is that fascist organizations say, you know what? There is an emergency right now. And if you do not allow me to break the law and erode democratic institutions, it's going to mean that you and your family are going to die or be kidnapped or be suppressed or whatever. And so what you're actually watching now with Trumpism is not just fascism and authoritarianism. It is paint by numbers authoritarianism and fascism. And these conspiracy theories are all about this stuff. And it's one of the ways that they gain power. So right now, actually, somebody's bringing up this. Do you think conspiracy theorists truly believe what they're spewing, or are they just going along the crowd? It depends. Somebody was asking me the other day whether or not I thought Mike Flynn actually believes like the QAnon bullshit. I don't know. I know that he's going to make a lot of money out of it because he's like the figurehead, and like all it will take to make him a hero is for him to do the digital soldier's oath. But it's somebody like Alex Jones. Alex Jones started this whole conspiracy thing back in the 1990s with the Branch Davidian fire and siege and all that, which is a total tragedy. And he just made a name for himself. And what ends up happening when you do a grift like that, like maybe you don't believe it, but then all of a sudden you have a financial incentive to believe it. And what ends up happening is you actually start sort of, you start drowning in this identity. And actually, for those who aren't familiar, a really good way to understand this is the professional wrestler Hulk Hogan. And I don't know if you've read about like what Hulk Hogan has talked about, but he talks about how, so his actual name is Terry Bollea, right? And he talks about how Hulk Hogan and Terry Bollea are two different entities, right? And that he actually gets caught up in the character of Hulk Hogan and starts becoming them, which unfortunately is how identities work in the modern world. Is you start playing a character, and over time you start to grow into that character, which is one of the reasons why fascist movements work the way they do. Like people start playing around with fascistic ideals, and then they do it more and more and more, and then they find a group and they become more radicalized, and it goes from something they're playing around with to something they are. I mean, this is one of the reasons why, young boys might carve like swastikas in public bathrooms, or mess around with stuff like that. It's really disgusting. And what ends up happening is they become radicalized, the more incentive that they have. So do I believe all these conspiracy theorists believe what they're talking about? Maybe not, but they eventually will if there's enough money for them to, make. Do I think that Donald Trump believes all the stuff he says? Absolutely. I think his brain is broken, and I think that he has a really hard time understanding nuance, and I think he believes a lot of the lies he tells. Queen Bean says, thoughts on the likelihood of a national teacher strike and or other big labor action in the next few months? Okay, that's a great question. And so what I'll start by saying is this. I think we need something. I think that we need some sort of mass action. I think the Black Lives Matter protest movement showed us that, and I talked about this on a past live stream, when Americans come together, and I see you, Brennan, I'll get that next up. When Americans come together in solidarity, there's nothing they can't do. And that history has shown us time and time again that American power is a pendulum that goes from people at the top having all the power and people having no power to people having power and this switching back and forth. We probably do need strikes. And right now, I don't think that's going to happen simply because I think we're all sort of stunned. It's like right after like a giant explosion, like everyone's still trying to catch their bearings. But I have to tell you that if the Republican Party doesn't actually help people, and I have no belief that they will, and we'll talk about why in a few minutes. If Trump doesn't give up with the bullshit that he's on, which I have no reason to believe he won't, things are going to get worse. And here in the next couple of months, if we send kids back to school and they're not prepared to be safe and to be healthy, and all of a sudden you have a bunch of kids getting sick and teachers getting sick, and you just have governors who, for whatever reason, aren't shutting things down and aren't being honest about what's going on. When you have stress like that, those movements become a possibility. So do I think it'll happen? I don't know, but there is an opening for it, because not only is this government doing such a terrible job handling the pandemic, they're doing such a terrible job that it is inspiring people to realize that they need to rely on each other for any sort of change or power. So do I think there's a possibility? Yeah, I do think there's a possibility. And I really wish Americans would realize that they have more power than maybe they think they do. And I actually think that we owe big cheers to the Black Lives Matter movement for showing us again that we have power. And that when you come together and you have a focused, intense movement of people in solidarity, you get things done. And I think the more that we watch that and the more that we realize that, what was the number the other day? It's like 70% of Americans now are questioning systemic racism. That's a small miracle in an incredibly divided country. So I think there's a possibility of mass movements, but we have to do it. That's just the thing. You have to do it. All right. Brendan says, do I have advice for people who decide to pursue a career change in political technical journalism? How do you train yourself to become a great investigator? Be curious. Ask questions about everything. The only reason that I've been able to have any success is because I just want to know how stuff works. I kind of get to a point where somebody will just say that something works like something, and then like a little kid, I just want to say, and then what? Why? And I think that having endless curiosity, particularly in terms of politics and journalism, I think is incredibly important. I would give this piece of advice to anybody. To anybody who wants it. I think this is great personal advice. And that is, stop pretending that you know things that you don't know. I had this, so I'm a big reader. Let me turn this light on. I'm a big reader. And I used to do this thing where I would read books, and I don't know if you've ever done this, but I would read books and I would come across a word that I didn't know, but I would pretend that I knew it. Does that make sense? I would read it, and in my brain, I knew I didn't know it, but I also tried to convince myself that I did know it. And then I was like, I need to stop doing this. And so now every time I come across a word that I don't know, I write it down and then look it up. And I sort of teach myself that way. I've stopped pretending that I know things that I don't know. And I think in politics and journalism, in every field, it's good to admit what you don't know and find people who know it. Investigate those things and trouble them. Do I actually know what conspiracies are posted on YouTube? Absolutely. It never stops. The QAnon people believe that Barron Trump is a time traveler. I thought that was I thought that was a joke. I really, when I first heard that, I was like, there's no way that's true. But they totally do. They believe that Barron Trump, Donald Trump's youngest son, is a time traveler. And this JFK is alive stuff. The problem is, and this is one of the reasons why conspiracy theories propagate the way they do, there actually are a bunch of things that we've been lied to about. And I see this question that says, how do we get the history you present in your new book out to the general public? You just got to tell people, and you got to find this actual history, because the history that we've been fed and the history we've been taught is just not real. It's weaponized mythology. And so what actually ends up happening is, because people are fed these lies and propaganda, and because they're manipulated, they start to distrust the people who are lying to them and feeding them propaganda and misinformation. So eventually these conspiracy theories sound pretty good. And especially if it's about a subject like global economics that they not only don't have an understanding for, they don't even have the beginnings of a vocabulary and or sort of a foundation to begin understanding it. So it's a lot easier to come up with myths that act on our natural prejudices. So yeah, if you want to tell people about the history I talk about, just tell them. I have to say, for me, when I talk to my friends and my family, whenever I discover something weird and new, I want to talk about it. And it actually makes your conversations and your relationships better. When you find these new facts, or when you start putting things together, it's interesting. And not only and this is the problem. we've come to believe that things like history have nothing to do with us. Like, it's a bunch of people who are dead and a bunch of things that happened way before we were ever alive. But it affects everyday life. I mean, the reason that we are in this current crisis, and you know, we stand around and we're like, how crazy is this? And yeah, it's crazy, but it's crazy because a bunch of crazy stuff happened that made this possible. And when you start piecing those things together, it actually starts explaining why you're where you are, which I think is incredibly important. So if you hear something that I talk about that you find interesting, tell other people. Explain it to them. Just give it to them base level stuff. You don't, you know, we don't all have to have, you know, doctorates in history and politics to go out and talk about this stuff. If you learn anything, just tell everyone who will listen to you. Cass says, a Hoosier here. Hey, Hoosiers. Very proud of being a Hoosier. My state frustrates me, but I'm proud to be a Hoosier. What's my take on Pence? Do you think he had the same detrimental pressures you spoke of in The Man They Wanted Me to Be? That's my memoir about growing up with abusive men and toxic masculinity. I know he's taking advantage of the moment in time to press religious extremist goals. What else motivates? Here's the thing about Pence. If you actually look at Pence's rise, he's one of those, going back to what we were talking about with these conspiracy theorists and who believes what. Pence is one of those opportunists. He's basically a weather vane. He has always sort of stood in the back of things and watched how the Republican Party and the rest of the world was moving, and he would pick his battles. And actually, it's one of the reasons why he was like a radio talk show host. That's what they do. They figure out what's going on in the world or what's driving conversation, and then they react to it. And then they put whatever their opinion is based on that idea. That's who Pence is. And at its heart, he is an evangelical who is interested in creating a Christian world. He's interested in creating a world that runs explicitly by Christian ideology, that oppresses other religions, that oppresses women, oppresses gay people, and anyone who isn't like himself. I think he's a really disgusting person. And he's really dangerous. I mean, I try and tell people this all the time. If Donald Trump was even like a percentage more professional and even like a little bit more careful and disciplined, we would be in incredible trouble. And we're in incredible trouble right now, but it would be even worse because the media falls all over themselves trying to make him seem professional and disciplined, like he has ideology. Trump doesn't have ideology besides trying to fill the empty void within him, which is one of the reasons I was actually excited that Mary Trump, her book came out, because it's obviously this is a broken person in search of something that he'll never find. Pence is a lot more of an ideologue. And, you know, he will find any opportunity that he possibly can to push that ideology that he has. If he ever becomes president, you are going to watch a push towards the evangelical right that you're not going to believe, because the media is going to normalize it. All these xenophobic, nationalistic, white supremacist ideas are going to get all balled up into that evangelical ideology. And it could be really dangerous, like incredibly dangerous. What do I anticipate from Barr in the coming months in terms of show trials? Anything. Absolutely anything. Bill Barr has absolutely no bottom in terms of what he would do. If you told me right now, and listen, I don't think this is going to happen, but if somebody like came back from the future and told me that Barack Obama would be put on trial in October for supposed treason, I would believe you. I really would. I think Bill Barr is another one of those evangelical dominionists who believes that the world should be run via, Christian evangelical neo-Confederate ideology. It's one of the reasons he's destroying the rule of law. He's told basically anyone who would ever listen that he believes the law is something that's handed down from God, and as a result, holy people can just sort of manipulate it however they want. If that means the destruction of law, well, so be it. It means the destruction of law. Alan Q says, when we emerge post-COVID, whenever that is, say July 2021, which is, man, isn't that terrible? That July 2021 sounds like a, hey, Wedge, thanks for reading my book. Man, they want to be. I appreciate that. If you told me that July 2021 is when like we can emerge from this, like even at this point, that sounds halfway decent, which is so sad. We're going to have 2 million disabled by COVID, 15% unemployed, 5 million homeless in the EU and China. Japan are okay with a little disease and mild recession. What changes in the world trades and politics do you see? Here's the truth, and I'll start by saying this. I think one of the main faults in politics, and one of the things that gets us in the most trouble, is we have a really bad habit of thinking that tomorrow will look exactly like today. We basically, and if you've never read it, I would recommend at some point checking out The End of History by Fukuyama. And basically it was this, after the beginning of the fall of Russia, this neocon, Francis Fukuyama, like puts out this essay that basically says that the world has decided that American-style liberal democracy will be the last type of government, and we're just basically going to have a world that just kind of like goes along like this. That's not how things work. And we actually have if you disbelieve that, I'll just say this. Right now, America, like let's say that tomorrow, like a world war broke out. Like God help us. I really hope that doesn't happen. Do you realize what side we would be on if Donald Trump had his way? Our main allies now are Russia and Turkey and North Korea. Like we are partnering up with some really disgusting people. We would be on the wrong side of that battle. We already are. He's pushed away all of our liberal democratic allies. I mean, he has insulted them one after another and hurt our treaties with them, I think on purpose, if we're going to be honest. What's the world going to look like post-COVID? It depends on what happens with Donald Trump. There is a possibility, like let's say that Trump loses and let's say that he leaves, which I don't think is a foregone conclusion. And, I agree with Josh Berthum when he says that those 7 hours between when polls close and 2 a.m. on election night are like 7 of the most important hours in American history. There's a possibility that if Trump loses and actually leaves and we don't have a civil war, we don't have blood in the streets, there is a possibility that America might be knocked off of its pedestal and so embarrassed by what's happened with COVID and so hurt by what's happened with COVID that maybe we'll start to work within the world community. Maybe we can start to have those allyships where, it's not George W. Bush pretending to be a Wild West sheriff. Maybe we'll actually start to work with other countries. That would be awesome. I think that is maybe the best case scenario. If Donald Trump gets reelected, steals the election, or refuses to leave, I have to tell you, I said it last time. I did one of these Bourbon talks. Election night or election day, I would recommend that you go out and you vote as early as possible and you get ready to be in the streets if you have to. Because I'm telling you, if this guy gets a second term by hook or by crook, things are going to get really bad. I mean, look what he's doing right now. I mean, not just commuting, sentences, but just by, his blatant criminal acts. If he goes in and he doesn't have to worry about anything else, or I don't know, maybe, he might not leave in general. He's joked about having multiple terms, and let me tell you, those jokes are not jokes. The world could look really bad. The world could look really bad. What truths do I think the pandemic has revealed about America? I think it's revealed that we don't actually value each other, or at least millions of us don't. I think a lot about when smoking rules went into effect and you started having like smoking sections in restaurants and people were like, I don't care if people are getting sick from secondhand smoke. You don't tell me what to do. There are a lot of Americans who really don't value the lives of other people. Not even enough to wear a mask, not even enough not to go out and party and just blatantly, go against everything that people are saying. I think it's revealed that. I think it's revealed that, I do read Chomsky. There's some really good stuff there. Everyone should read some Chomsky. It has shown that the economy is inhuman and unstable. It has shown that we are more than willing to shovel our fellow people into the jaws of a pandemic. I mean, what's getting ready to happen with these schools? I mean, you had DeVos and Trump who are just saying, put kids back in school. They're not going to give money to these schools. They're not going to give them any instruction. It's shown that corporate leadership and particularly delegation of responsibility, surveillance capitalism is must read. That'll keep you up at night. We've shown that this isn't a system that works. Our leaders that we have are people who they're not interested in leading. They're interested in the benefits of being leaders in terms of profit and power. But these people just keep pushing whatever responsibility or decisions they need to make next to the next level. That's why the federal government hasn't done anything. They're not interested in being on the hook for what happens. They're making the states make decisions. And then you have a bunch of governors, most of them Republicans, who are then making the local level make decisions. And then the local people are like, nah, make the businesses make decisions. It doesn't work because we have this corporate profit system where these people would much rather not take responsibility and not anger people and continue to have profit and power. It's really broken. So that's what what it's shown us. Oh, this is great. I've written about how the Avengers movies promote powerlessness. What does that mean? So real fast. And by the way, this might, I don't know, maybe everybody will log off and they'll be like, screw you. Listen, I'm not saying I don't like the Avengers movies. I'm not saying I don't like the Marvel Universe. But I think that there is a reading of those movies. And by the way, real fast, let's look at the cast of the Avengers, right? You have Captain America, who is the embodiment of America. You have Tony Stark, who is an arms dealer. You have the Incredible Hulk, who is the personification of the nuclear bomb. You have Vision, who is an AI program. You have the Black Widow, who is a reformed, Russian spy. And then you have Thor, who is an Aryan god. And all of a sudden, they and S.H.I.E.L.D. are out taking on all of the major problems facing America. In the first one, it's the god of mischief, right? Things happen. In the next one, it's Ultron, right? And he is, an artificial intelligence gone bad. It's weird that happened right before we started having all these bots and social media misinformation. Then they take on Thanos, who is a genocidal madman, and all of a sudden, we have a pandemic. Now, that doesn't mean that we know that these things are happening. It doesn't mean there's a psychic connection, but we kind of feel these things. A really interesting thing happened, and if you haven't read it, Zizek's Welcome to the Desert of the Real makes an amazing case for this, which is in the 1990s and the early 2000s, there were all these movies that, like Independence Day, right? I just watched that the other night. Still enjoyable, but absolutely patently ridiculous. So you start having all these movies where like New York is being blown up and capitals are being blown up. And there are these like 9/11 type destructions, right? Well, what actually ends up happening is there's this relationship between mass media and people, and it goes in a cycle, right? So like you watch something and it affects how you believe, and then all of a sudden it affects like what you watch, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. The Avengers tells us that, yeah, the world is really weird and dangerous, but there's stuff that is taking care of things while we're asleep, right? So like in a culture of powerlessness where we feel like we can't affect politics, or like we can't feel like we can, our votes matter, or, politicians don't pay attention to us. Thank God the military and all these elements, America, the atomic bomb, this Aryan god, a weapons manufacturer, it's out there taking care of us, right? So it turns into this cycle where all of a sudden, and listen, this is rough, we start looking for heroes. Right? And this is one of the reasons why you kept seeing Robert Mueller dressed up as Captain America. Or you would see, Nancy Pelosi, as like Scarlet Witch or something like that. We start looking for superheroes to take care of things for us, right? And we keep, like, on social media, we're like, please, let this person, this is the person who's going to save us. And we're waiting on them to do the thing. The real problem is, while we're looking for heroes, we're the ones who have to make the change. Because again, the way that American power works is we go through these, the Punisher, that's a whole different ballgame. My God, that is like straight fascism that has just infected the country. That's a whole different ballgame. The pendulum swings back and forth between not having power and the people having power. In times of not having power, we look to heroes. And not only that, but we look to heroes who were created particularly in times of power. That's why the Avengers and Superman and all that are so popular right now. They come from like the 1940s and 50s, where we felt like things were competent and things worked in our favor. So it's not that necessarily the Avengers shouldn't be a thing, but it's one of the reasons why it's so popular. It's because we're looking for all of these elements of America and our culture to take care of the problems for us. It's like an unconscious manifestation of our hopes and fears and dreams. And if you actually pay attention to pop culture is just our unconscious thoughts and fears and hopes and dreams playing out to us, and it actually reinforces them. Jeff, how exactly do we push back against all this without becoming fascist ourselves? That is a major question. I'm so glad that got asked. That is one of the first things that we have to realize. Let me turn this up. We cannot, while we're fighting these people, we cannot fall down their level. And I actually thought that Michelle Obama's thing, when they go low, we go high, was like a really kind of incredible quote. It doesn't mean that we're above a fight, but it means that we don't stoop to their levels. We have to recognize that you can only win this by things like organization, but also telling the truth. The disinfectant for all of this is to tell the truth. Like when Trump and all these white supremacists come out and they talk about history and protecting history, they're not protecting history. They're protecting a mythology. And that mythology falls apart really, really fast. Like everyone likes to ask me, they think it's a big gotcha question. They're like, okay, well, you think this statue should be torn down. Should Thomas Jefferson's statue be torn down? Which I think is something you could argue. I would much rather that we use Thomas Jefferson as a learning tool. Thomas Jefferson was like one of the chief proponents in the world during the Enlightenment, talking about freedom and equality and human decency while owning human beings. That right there shows us not only that America is flawed, but that America has aspirations it can reach to while being flawed. So I look at this whole thing and I say, we cannot do things. And listen, I have to tell you, going back to the fact we're talking about like things like my family. My family supports Trump. My family, a lot of them don't necessarily believe in the COVID thing. A lot of them are really aggressive about that stuff. I don't want them to die. My God, I love them. There are tons of people in this country who are not behaving in the right way or they're not doing the right thing. We shouldn't want them to die. I don't think that we should take enjoyment out of their suffering as if their enjoyment is somehow or another our victory. That's the thing that Trump infects this country with. We should spend a lot of time realizing that we would be a whole lot better if we were on the same page. But we cannot fall for the same traps that Trump sets for everybody. Because Trump, and by the way, this is the problem. We talked about like popular culture and how it infects the way we think about things and we affect it. Donald Trump has set the tone. Presidents set the tone in this country. And unfortunately, because we have this person out in front of us all the time, the way that they handle things affects the way that we handle things. And it really affects the way the culture feels. Donald Trump has turned it into an us versus them, tribal warfare, so to speak, game theory type culture, right? I have to win, you have to lose, all of that stuff. And I think that we have to keep our eye on higher ideals. We can't break the law. We can't celebrate suffering. We have to realize that we need a pluralist, good society. So I think that's how we stop from becoming fascist. We have to keep our eye on what we want, and that's how we get to where we want to go, right? Joshua says, what is your take on the White House trying to discredit Fauci? It's just insane. But that's the thing. I wrote about this when this whole pandemic started. Authoritarians like Trump, they follow a cycle. I've written about it on the Muck Break, talked about it on the podcast, this authoritarian cycle. They're naturally incompetent. They're really bad at everything because they think they're great. Going back to that thing where I was talking about know what you don't know. Authoritarians can't handle not knowing something. They have to be the smartest person in every room. Oh, I walked in the room and the generals are like, sir, you're the strongest person I've ever seen. Oh, I've never seen somebody ace a cognitive test or whatever bullshit he was peddling. That's a terrible Trump impression. That's awful. I can't. It disgusts me to hear him talk. So I'm not good at an impression of him. But authoritarians are naturally incompetent. They're actually defined by their insecurity and incompetence. So what ends up happening is that authoritarians surround themselves with sycophants, which is what Trump has, right? He has a bunch of people who worship him. And actually, this is one of the reasons, and Trump's entire business model reflects this, but this is what authoritarians always do. They bring together a bunch of people, and then they pit them against each other, like throwing a couple of insects in a jar and making them fight. And what Trump makes them do is he makes them compete over who is most loyal. And so what ends up happening is authoritarians are terrible at building structures that work together. That's why they're terrible, as governors. They're terrible in these executive positions because they constantly are pitting their subordinates against each other to see who loves them more because they need to be worshipped because they have like a black void within them that can never be filled. right? So that's what Trump does. And then on top of it, experts really upset them. And if you'll remember, just think back to this, because my God, this thing has been going on for a while. Remember when he went to the CDC, right? And he goes in and he just doesn't really listen to any of the scientists or experts there. And when the cameras came around, Bullet Bourbon, when the cameras came around, Trump's like, oh, I know so much about this stuff that even the scientists were saying that I know they couldn't believe I knew so much. That's what he does. He does not want to ever admit that there isn't something he's a master of, because authoritarians, if somebody around them knows something they don't know, then it means that they're not perfect and infallible, and their entire identity falls apart. So Trump can't work with scientists. So the thing with Fauci was always going to happen. And Fauci wants to actually save lives. So yeah, Trump's going to turn on him and, vilify him, and that's just unfortunately what's going to happen. Okay, here we go. Mozetta Stone asked, the White House used the term manifest destiny. It reminded me of a convo I had with a historian friend and the origins of that term. In addition to the atrocities, laid the foundation of some of the climate change issues we have now. Real fast. Manifest destiny is one of the most misunderstood. By the way, we're going a little bit later tonight. We have a bunch of really good questions, and I still got bourbon. So hang out, huh? So manifest destiny. Whenever I learned about it, I don't know how you all learned about it. I learned about it in 4th or 5th grade, and it was just settlers out chopping wood and having a good time, or kind of a rustic lifestyle, and they were really good friends with the Native Americans and all that good stuff. That hides a really crazy, awful thing. And I learned this, again, doing research for American Rule. I learned that manifest destiny wasn't just the idea that America should just spread out over the continent. It was the idea that white people should, and that white people were God's chosen race. And again, this is the neo-Confederate idea, right? And this is the idea that God has a chosen race of people, and they can do whatever they want at any given time, because anything they do is the natural will of God. And so as a result, and by the way, in case you're paying attention, this is fascism. They think, oh, well, if I don't know, displace Native Americans, lie to them, steal from them, kill them, poison them, commit genocides, well, obviously that's God's will. That's what God wanted. And if you actually look at the art of the time, whether or not it's paintings or poetry or stories or essays, it's all Anglo-Saxon. They believed that white people were a chosen race of people, and that there was this thing going on. Actually, if you're interested in this, you got to learn about the Romantic period, which is this period of time in the 19th century where, all of a sudden it's about pastoral places, it's about romantic poetry, but it's also about bringing back something that people felt like they lost from the Middle Ages. It romanticizes this idea of lost knowledge and simplicity, right, as the country's starting to change. So all of a sudden you start talking about these nation states that are taking place during, the Middle Ages. They're all ethnic based, right? Anglo-Saxons and stuff. Fireworks, everyone. So all of a sudden you start having this idea of white supremacy in action. So they're going to take over the country, and they're going to kill Native Americans because God told them to do whatever they wanted. So Manifest Destiny was actually a white supremacist movement. I mean, if you actually read the things of the time, that's exactly what they wanted to do. And they knew it at the time. It's been cleaned up over time. And here's the thing. You want to get into some really weird shit? Because, again, we're going a little bit late tonight. You know who really admired Manifest Destiny? Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler really admired the way that Americans took care of Native Americans. He really admired Manifest Destiny as the idea of weaponized Aryanism. He actually really admired the Confederacy as well, and got a lot of his inspiration from the things that we did. Here's one of the great hidden truths, and I've been looking at a lot of this lately because I'm putting together a new book proposal. Hitler actually got a lot of his inspiration from America and Great Britain. He got a lot of his inspiration from so-called Anglo-Saxon exceptionalism. He looked at the way the British treated their colonies. He looked at the way that America treated Native Americans and African Americans, and he wanted to bring that back. He was really upset that we stopped, carrying out genocides against people of color. He was really upset that slavery was done away with. He really wanted to bring that back. And it was part of the exact same movement of manifest destiny. And we don't talk about that. Because if we talked about that, we would suddenly start to understand that America has had fascism since its very beginning, and that American white supremacy has been one of the more disgusting things in the history of the modern world. So that's that. And by the way, go real fast just to answer your question, Molly, I think it is. Why worry about climate change? The earth is here for white people to use. If God chose us, there's no way he's going to lead us into an apocalypse in terms of the climate. Why wouldn't he take care of it? Or why would we ever watch what we do to the world? The world is ours, to do with as we please, which is a really terrible thing because the rest of us are going to be screwed. I mean, we already are. I mean, climate change is here and we're going to deal with it. And just a real fast thing before we get to the next question. Man, we still got good questions. Hang around. I promise. We got to talk about stuff. What you're seeing with Trump and kids on the border and cages and stuff and rising fascism. Do you know when fascism is going to be a real problem? It's going to be a real problem when we have millions of climate change refugees. All of a sudden, you're going to have a lot of people who are going to be disposable, particularly as America's white supremacist prejudices are used to determine who gets land and resources. So if you think it's bad right now, I mean, this thing is just getting started, unfortunately. How unapologetic do you suggest teaching these topics? Carlos asked. I would say this. I would say that we're just talking about history. We're not actually talking about anything. We're not talking about indoctrination. We're not talking about anything radical. We're talking about actual history. There's nothing to dispute here. So teach it how you want, break it to people however you want, but we're not talking about anything actually crazy. We're talking about the truth. Just are. Okay. If you've covered it before. Oh, no. I got one. Oh, the next one. Okay, here we are. I promised that I was going to talk about this. What do you make of UFOs/aliens, all these governmental investigations being recently uncovered? We're going to talk about UFOs for a hot minute. So here's the thing. When I was little, I've told people before that I was part of, this sort of like white identity, neo-Confederate evangelical cult. My family was obsessed with paranormal stuff because if you're told that like Satan is like trying to get you and demons are after you, I mean, aliens are the next thing. So when I was little, I was terrified of aliens. I asked my grandma once, and my grandma was like one of these people who read the Weekly World News and believed it was real. And I asked my grandma once, I was like, what if like aliens come and try and take us? She's like, oh, I mean, they have better technology than us. You'd be done. So like that was a terrifying thing when I was little. I'm sure it might have been for a lot of you too. The thing about UFOs and aliens and all of that stuff. So when this really became popular, particularly in the 1950s during the Cold War, and going back to what we were talking about with the Avengers, a lot of this was about fear of Sputnik, right? Of Russian satellites, the idea that Russians had better technology than us. And we ended up actually projecting a lot of our fear about Soviets and Soviet technology onto the idea that there could be races that are more advanced than us that could just wipe us out. A lot of the UFOs and things like that people have seen are actually like, test weapons and test vehicles that the United States government has kept up, kept under wraps. The stealth bomber for a long time was like one of the most common sighted UFOs. This stuff that we're seeing right now, and by the way, like none of what we're talking about says that there aren't other life forms out in the universe. I totally believe that there are. It's almost a mathematical certainty. Do I think they're visiting the world? I think in the age of cell phones, like man, wouldn't we be seeing a lot more at this point? But these videos that we're seeing get rolled out now where like these pilots are like, seeing these vehicles moving or whatever, I have to assume that's other technology. I have to assume that that's more technology that we're not necessarily aware of, whether it's drones or some sort of propulsion that we don't know of so far. And I don't know necessarily if it's American or if it's people from outside. If you believe that America doesn't have like, vehicles or drones from other countries that come into our airspace, like that's absolutely happening. So again, I think when you start looking at UFOs and all of that stuff through the lens of the Cold War and you realize it's a projection of our, again, unconscious fears, it starts to make much more sense about what it is. I'm so glad somebody asked about UFOs. That was pretty good. Oh, there has to be life on other planets. If we are the only planet in the universe, like that has life, that's incredible. Like that would be an incredible thing to be true. Lake Rooster. Cheers. Lake Rooster. If you've covered it before, please ignore. Related to toxic masculinity, I wonder about Stephen Miller, Tucker Carlson's ex-writer Blake Neff, the incel phenomenon. It's all part of it. And by the way, if you haven't picked up the string yet, let's just put it out there. Fascism is about insecure men. We've always had this myth that fascism is actually about strength. So it's actually a bunch of really insecure, terrified men who put on airs of being stronger than they are. I mean, there's a reason why Nazis dressed all in black and had death's head pins and acted all tough with these big giant rallies or whatever. They were a bunch of cowards. They were a bunch of terrified, insecure men who just needed to build themselves up. So fascism is the last respite of really pathetic, insecure men. I've talked to one former white supremacist, former neo-Nazi, after another. They look for insecure men. And so insecure men try and gussy themselves up and try and make themselves larger by investing in fascism and investing in hatred and prejudice. It makes them feel stronger than their insecurities. So we need to change the way we look at fascism. When you hear about the alt-right, you hear about neo-Nazis, you hear about white supremacists, all that, they're really sad, pathetic men. And by the way, look no further than the Rosetta Stone himself, Donald Trump. He's pathetic. He's so sad. He's brittle thin. And everybody talks about how tough he is. He's brittle. Like the moment that a person says anything mean to him, he just falls apart. And the reason that he's a bully, I mean, we've all had these people in our families. We have people who boast about how much money they have, how many women they've had, how cool they are, how good looking they are, all that stuff. And then the moment they leave the room, everyone's like, oh, that's so sad. Donald Trump is sad. And when you actually start to view him through that lens, you can start to understand who he is and what this movement is. It's a bunch of really insecure men, many of them frustrated about their jobs, their careers. They're terrified by a society where patriarchy is being torn apart. And so, yeah, they embrace fascism as a last resort. So, yeah, that's definitely there. Cat, the connection between Eisenhower and Nixon. I want to talk about this real fast. The move from Eisenhower to Nixon is a really important moment in the history of the Republican Party. Dwight Eisenhower was a fascinating individual. If you actually sit there and look at Eisenhower's career, he was this general who was actually opposed to war. He had this moment where he was part of the military-industrial complex being created. He was one of the chief investigators and proponents of this idea. And then as it started to come in, and all of a sudden, by the way, one of the biggest redistributions of wealth we've ever seen, going back to talking about higher education, doing all this research and development for the military, after all of a sudden that went away, that's when the military-industrial complex started taking its place, which is why we started sending all of our money there instead of our colleges. So the military-industrial complex, comes in, does all this stuff, and Eisenhower's like, this is really terrible and really, really dangerous. And if you spend some time, actually reading Eisenhower's speeches, they're incredibly liberal. And he talks about how every warship and every gun and every bomb is a theft from the people. And he works really, really hard to try and move against that. Now, the truth about Richard Nixon, Eisenhower didn't like him. Really, really disliked him because I think Eisenhower recognized in Nixon who he was. He basically got talked into making him his running mate because he needed somebody younger and he needed to sort of make this gesture towards part of the party. Nixon comes in and Nixon is just as disgusting as you can imagine. And one of the first things that happens is he gets caught with a political slush fund that should have ended his career, maybe should have put him in jail. And Nixon trots his family out in what we've now called the Checkers speech, where, he puts his family in front of the camera and basically says to America, you're going to hurt my children if you come after me. And so he uses his family as props for his political fortunes. Unfortunately, it's really successful because Richard Nixon understood television before a lot of people. That myth that JFK beat him for the presidency because of TV, it's kind of true, but Nixon really got the consumer part of television before anybody else did. So Nixon ends up saving his VP candidacy with Eisenhower because of that speech, but he doesn't like him. He doesn't trust him. And that is where you watch the Republican Party actually change. Because what ends up happening is you go from Eisenhower, of course, then you go to JFK. And then, of course, you end up with Goldwater being the standard bearer for the Republican Party. And if you want to understand where Trumpism came from and all these conspiracies come from and all of like the virulent white supremacy, look at Goldwater. There's a really good book by Pearlstein. I want to say it's Before the Storm. It's a really great detailing of Goldwater and how the Republican apparatus came together and how it was white supremacist, but also paranoid and dangerous. And, you know, Nixon kind of took the respectability of Eisenhower and the paranoia and racism of Goldwater. And because he was a born salesman and an opportunist, he sort of like mixed them together and understood that the Republican Party needed to have a veneer of respectability, plus also go after white supremacists and angry white people, which is how we get the Southern strategy, which, by the way, if you didn't know, Roger Ailes helped him do. Roger Ailes came along and became like a media advisor for Richard Nixon and taught him basically how to mass produce mass media white supremacy. A lot of fun. Guy who started Fox News. A lot of fun. Real fast, Molly says, Jared, is there a group that trains volunteers to work with neo-Nazis or Q online? Not yet. Not yet. But I feel like we're getting to the point where people are starting to understand that QAnon is dangerous. Quick plug, because this is my live stream. I'm actually going to be on Al Jazeera tomorrow. I want to say it's at noon. I think it's at noon. Maybe it's at 11:30. I'll check and I'll post on Twitter. But I'm going to be live on Al Jazeera for a special about QAnon. I think people are starting to get it. I think people are starting to understand that this is a really dangerous fascistic cult. So it would be wonderful if some people get there. Lane says, well, I don't have ice in my whiskey. I like just a little splash of water. You know, every now and then in the summer, I'll put a little ice in it, but pretty straight. Okay. Eric, I'd be curious about your perspective as a college professor on the right's view of indoctrinating. Oh, going back to what I said earlier, I don't know if you heard that or maybe you've just come in. College professors aren't interested in indoctrinating. They're interested in giving information. If students become radicalized because they understand truth and they start making decisions for themselves instead of having the influence of people, well, I don't know what to tell you. But no, my goal when I go to work is to educate people and make them, you know, more able to speak their minds and, you know, go after what they want. I don't care who they vote for. I don't talk about it in the classroom. What's really weird, I have like this very open political second career. And they don't, by the end of and I always tell them on the first day, I'm like, hey, just so you know, I've got this thing out there. You know, you might come across something I've tweeted, or maybe you'll go looking for it and you'll see what my politics are. I don't care about that in the classroom. But then at the end of the semester, I have students come up and they're like, I don't even know what your politics are. Are you a Republican or are you a Democrat? And I'm like, neither, but we don't even need to talk about it. I mean, I've had plenty of students who were Republicans or right wing, and we still keep in touch and I still help them out. I don't care what my students' politics are. I care that they're passionate and educated and they do stuff. And my colleagues are the same way. College is not about indoctrination. It's about giving people information and letting them make their own minds up. Janelle says, hi, Jared. Do you think that the president's children will aim to have a more active role in politics in the years ahead? We got 2 questions left and then we're going to sign off. Yeah, I think that if we watch this thing continue, what we end up seeing is in these authoritarian states, it becomes about heritage, you know, and hereditary politics. So I think that what we're looking at, particularly if Trump wins a second term, steals a second term, stays for another term, who knows? Unfortunately, because he is an abusive, divisive father, and going back to what I said about how they pit people against each other to see about their love, I think we're going to see a big fight between Ivanka and Donald Trump Jr. over who inherits the legacy of their dad. I mean, there's a possibility that a scandal might take Donald Trump Jr. down because, I mean, that dude is disgusting and also sad. You know, now that we're hearing this stuff coming from Mary Trump, and I assume like you probably knew that Donald Trump was either abused or somehow or another damaged just by who he is and how he behaves. Donald Trump Jr. is exactly the same. And, you know, he's just so sad. If I was ever in the same place as him, I would just be like, I'm so sorry for who you are, because it's really pathetic and it's just so, it's pitiable. It really, really is. And the fact that he is become like, a neo-fascist simply to try and gain the love of his father is just not just sad, but tragic. So yeah, scandal might take him down. He's pretty disgusting. Ivanka, man, the things that she's capable of, I can't even imagine. I mean, the way she's navigated her father's presidency is just horrifying. So yeah, I think there's a possibility that Ivanka and Donald Trump Jr. might be the inheritors of Trump's legacy, depending upon whether or not he wins a second term, steals a second term, or doesn't. I think that they have futures, and I don't think we're going to get rid of them. I really don't, unfortunately. Purple Sword says Comey's gone. Who's going to play the role of James Comey? Barr has no credibility or power to do what Comey did. I agree with that he doesn't have Comey's respectability, so to speak, but I would never rule out Bill Barr's ability to do something. And I have to tell you, I was talking today with somebody, and they were asking like what I thought the plans were of the Trump administration to win re-election, like how to steal the election. I don't think they have a plan. I think they're reactionaries. I think grifters like Donald Trump continually do whatever they have to survive. I mean, Donald Trump's entire life, if you've ever watched like Breaking Bad's entire narrative structure is based on Walter White, the main character, getting in these jams and then having to get out of the jam, right? And you're always like, my God, how's he going to get out of this jam? That's what Trump's entire career has been, whether or not it's been all of his investments and failures or his public scandals or even this political thing. I mean, he is a person who just, is addicted to constantly pushing the envelope and then figuring out later what he'll do. And he just reacts, and that's what ends up happening is he either succeeds or fails. And a lot of the time he succeeds by failing because of, the broken meritocracy and white supremacy and white privilege. That being said, people like Bill Barr and people like Mike Pence, this is their chance, man. Like, they want a white Christian world. Donald Trump is the closest that they felt like they've gotten to that because they have an authoritarian in power who will allow them to do whatever and will allow their corruption and their ideology to run free. So do I think they'll do something? I think they'll try. I think those are the people who are having actual meetings about how to try and steal election or how to, try and do something, untoward. So yeah, if I had to put my money on somebody, it'd be Bill Barr. I don't think this election is in the bag by any stretch of the imagination. 2016 told me to stop predicting elections, and do I think Trump himself is just kind of along for the ride? Yeah, I think right now, again, he's just sort of trying things. And I think that's why we've got this dumb white supremacist push that he's got going right now. He's running ads in states that he won last time in double digits. He's in real trouble. Now, does that mean he won't win? No, it doesn't. He has a real chance of winning. And every Republican has a natural advantage. But I can't tell if that's firework or a gunshot. Georgia. But I think at this point he's just trying things, but that doesn't mean the election's done. It does not mean, because the Electoral College is naturally advantageous for the Republican Party because it was set up to give an advantage to slaveholding states, which is their base now. So the Electoral College naturally is in their favor, which means that he definitely has a chance of winning. And on top of that, I would not bet against him possibly, subverting the process. I just think he possibly could. Yeah, I think that's a real possibility. Why wouldn't he? I mean, this guy is not afraid of breaking the law. He's not afraid of breaking convention. I wouldn't hold anything past him. I'll just be honest. So, real fast, we made it through. Cheers. That was really enjoyable. It was really cool of you to hang out. A quick rundown of what's going on this week. The Muckrake podcast is taping an episode tomorrow. I'm really excited about the guest. If it goes through, and again, last week we got Kevin Levin, who I thought was awesome. If our guest comes through this week, I think it's going to be very good. I think we have a couple of people ready to go. I think it's going to be a good episode on Tuesday, a good episode on Friday. I'm going to be live on Al Jazeera tomorrow, so keep an eye. I want to say it's like 11:30 or noon. I'll post that on Twitter if you want to watch that and see what's going on. Absolutely, Canada should be afraid of Americans coming. Man, Canada's getting sort of radicalized right now too. You're seeing the QAnon people definitely spreading over the border and bringing some of our crazy over there. But anyway, yeah, I'll post the link to the Al Jazeera thing. We'll have the Muckrake podcast on Tuesday and Friday. I'll have blog post on the Muckrake on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. This was awesome. Thank you so much. We just went for like an hour and 20 minutes, went through a whole list of questions. They're fantastic. I'm trying to do these every Sunday. They're way too much fun. So just kind of hang out, 8 p.m. on Sundays if you want to do it again. If you want to get questions, feel free to get them to me whenever. I'll make sure and field them. And again, like not to be too sentimental, but these are rough times. I mean, pandemic, rising fascism, a lot of stress over the government. It's very cool for you guys to come hang out with me for an evening. It just really touches me. So thank you, everyone. Please be safe. All right. I'll see you later.